All right. Hey, Jolyn, thanks for calling in from Colorado. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Jerry. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me again.
Awesome. I know. Yeah, we just aired your interview with us. I think it was like episode 319. You talked about overcoming adversity, actually leveraging and coming out of life catastrophes, and
Yeah.
you've been helping people do that, and
Mhm.
since then, I mean, you're now a certified trauma recovery coach. So I think that I mean, now folks don't know. Like we recorded that episode like late
A while ago.
2021, and it
Yeah.
didn't get to finally air until just a few weeks ago. And of course, this episode we're recording, now in September of
Mhm.
2022, and it probably won't air for a few more months. So
Mhm.
we've known each other for about a year by the time people hear this.
Yes. Yeah. We're good old friends now, Jerry.
Yeah, yeah. We know each other's kids, and
Right. Barbecues.
oh man, that'd be awesome. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I never turned down barbecue. But that's not why we got you on. So
Yeah.
yeah, since the last time we chatted, and since and we reconnected when that episode aired a
Mhm.
few weeks back, you've got a book that has come out now. It's called Trauma Recovery: The 90-Day Guidebook to Building a Great Life After Trauma. And so we're talking about like that post-trauma growth. We all, in some way, experience trauma, whether it's directly as the first person or
Mhm.
secondary trauma, which I learned about when I was an educator with a battered women's shelter. That you have secondary trauma where the family members who see it happening, or the neighbors, or anybody who witnesses it or knows somebody who's gone through it, you're experiencing that trauma as well. And we need a way to process that, because if we process it, then we grow from it. We are able to help other people who go through it. Um,
Mhm.
and if we don't, we wind up having these unhealthy behaviors that impact other people, that we start lashing out at others. And I think I shared with you before we hit record, I probably see that happening, kind of right now. And it's like, hurt people
Mhm.
hurt people. Well, it's probably because they
Yeah.
haven't learned to heal from their trauma. So I guess I feel like I've just championed your book for you, and I haven't asked you a single question. Like, what is it you hope to help people achieve through the book Trauma Recovery?
hmm So I think, and thank you for asking that question, because this book really is a work from my heart for sure. What I see with trauma survivors is a lot of time that one thing that's really eroded is trust,
Mhm.
especially trust in authority, trust in people who say, trust me, let me help you, right? Uh, and so this book is a good first stepping stone for those people who say, listen, I'm not ready to seek out any kind of like quote unquote professional help. I want to just let me just see what I can learn on my own. Let me see what I can do from the safety of my own home. And maybe I can pick up some things here. And this is also, just like the title says, it's a 90-day guide. So there's a lot of journal pages, ability to think through things, write things down. There's something about pen to paper. So I provide a lot of opportunity in this book
Yeah.
for
And
folks to do
journaling,
that
I
too.
think it's really great that you added so many journal pages to this, because I've got,
Mhm.
I think the most popular post on beyondtherut.com is an article I wrote about why men should start a journal. And,
Mm,
one
yeah.
of the reasons is it helps you take what is not tangible, which is a thought inside your head that's just, it's there and then it goes. It's there, then it
Mhm.
goes. But the moment you take that thought and you write it down, you've now created something. It is now
Yes.
tangible. It is real. It is written word on paper, or typed word on a computer, and it's real
Yeah.
now. And you've now created with a thought, just by journaling. It's
Right.
the easiest
It's
way to create.
it's it is. It's an amazing process. And if you haven't tried it yet, I would encourage anyone, traumatized or otherwise,
Yeah,
anyone to give it a shot. It's nothing's going to hurt you
yeah,
through it,
exactly.
right? And what this one does too, what I've provided in this guidebook is prompts. I don't know what to write. A lot of people tell me I can't journal. I sit down to a blank piece of paper. I don't know what to do.
Yeah,
So I've included questions, I've included exercises, I've included options for people to write about through this process that are really geared towards trauma recovery.
yeah. And
Yeah.
you give them a variety of formats too. They can do a mind map. They can just write the words themselves. They can
Mhm.
draw. So there's no
Mhm.
one way or a right way to journal. It's all about getting that thought out of your head onto
Yeah.
something real. And I love that. I
Yeah.
mean, I've done that years ago. I was just writing down some events that happened in my life, and I remember crying after I'd written. I'm like, wow! Like when I finished writing it, and I looked at a paragraph, and I thought, I went through that.
Wow.
Oh man, and I cried, and I guess the good thing was I wake up before anybody else does in my family by hours. So by the time they woke up at 9, I'd already processed all this by 7 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of power in journaling. And then there's this powerful quote in this book. So I'm going through it right now. Hey everybody,
Yeah.
I got a copy. You should get one. Um, it and I love, why are we talking about post trauma growth and healing and thriving
Mhm.
from trauma? And you got
Mhm.
this quote in here that says you get to determine how much suffering you will allow in your life. You get to determine the level of joy in your life. You have that power. No one else.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. We all in this world are going to experience suffering. We just are. But we do get to determine that level of suffering.
Yeah.
How much am I going to endure here? How much am I going to let this experience affect me? And in what way?
Yeah.
Right? One thing, one of the elements of trauma is having the lack of control of circumstances in our lives, and we all experience that is a thing that happens. We lose a job, we get a divorce, I want to maintain this thing that's being taken from me,
Yeah.
and I don't have control over that. But what we can control is our reaction to that, and what we do with that uncontrolled circumstance. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I
yeah.
love somebody once pointed out to me, like, you know, we're going to have like emotional reactions. We're going to have that feeling on the inside. And what
Yeah.
matters is turning that into a response. And so, like, a response
Yeah.
takes thought, it takes consideration, it takes reflection. And yeah, we could definitely control how we respond. We may not
Mhm.
control whether or not we feel upset in the moment, but how we respond from that, huge, huge.
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
and so, there's a phrase you use in your book called dialectical behavioral therapy. Now, I'm
Mhm.
familiar with cognitive behavioral therapy because of where I used to work years and years and years ago. But what is dialectical behavioral therapy? And it has like 4 elements to it.
Yeah. So this DBT, it's a big word for a kind of a beautiful, simple process
Yeah.
that is helpful in a lot of things. So it is a kind of a branch of cognitive behavioral therapy. And it was developed by Marsha Linehan back in, I want to say, the 60s. And she initially developed it to help with her clients who had suicidal ideations, who were
Okay.
really struggling with that, and also who were struggling with mood disorders. And it now is really the gold standard in treating specifically those two things, but all of the things that those who are struggling with that experience. So, the fear and anxiety and all of those kinds of negative emotions. So yeah, the four modules, I guess, in DBT. The first one that I always touch on with clients is mindfulness.
Yeah.
If we can control to a certain extent our thoughts, that sets the stage for everything else. And that's one thing that happens when we're stressed, especially when we're traumatized, is that spinning mind, right? I sit down to do something. I know I've got to keep living my life, but I sit down, a thought enters my head and I start spinning, and I've lost an hour or 2 hours or whatever, right? I try to go to sleep. I can't sleep because my mind turns on. Mindfulness really helps with that. And so we use that on purpose for that reason, to help kind of control that. And another one is distress tolerance. So you think about the world we live in and all of the things that we encounter in our world. Distress tolerance is so helpful. So when we do encounter those really stressful, tense times, we have some skills on board to help us tolerate that and move forward. Emotion regulation is the third, and that helps us to lessened the number of kind of really out of control situations that we have, right? Some of the situations that we encounter when we're stressed, we encounter or are made worse because we're unable to really regulate our emotions. So that's really helpful. More skills on board for that. And then the last bit is interpersonal effectiveness. So we talk about coming through trauma, healing from trauma. One thing that trauma does is it kind of strips us of our confidence
Yeah.
and our ability to interact with others in a really meaningful way. And so we bring more skills on board to help with that as well.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I've learned, folks who go through trauma, especially if they've gone through abuse, it takes a lot to restore that confidence in them.
mm,
And that nagging thought is in the back of their minds. Like, is that person really correct? Am I not a good person? Am I not pretty? Am I not worthy of love? And this, men experience this too. Like, yeah, and so don't think this is just a women's thing. In fact,
mm,
men listening right now who've gone through trauma and gone through abuse are like, heck yeah, that is how I feel. Then you look around and like, did anybody hear that?
right.
But we know, and men
Yeah.
and women shouldn't be alone in that. And it takes a
Mm,
lot to recover
mhm.
from that.
Yeah.
And so I know a lot of people do a lot of talk on mindfulness. Mindfulness is kind of like the big buzzword right now. And anybody who's into like stoicism talks about mindfulness.
Mhm.
And then people who have no idea what it is just think it's somebody sitting and pretending to be like a Buddhist monk
Right.
and trying to become one with everything. Uh, what
Right.
is mindful? Like, how do we describe to folks in a very simple way, like what mindfulness? Like, I'm hoping we can kind of touch a little bit on each of the four modules and give some
Sure.
folks some practical tips to handle and start the recovery process if they're going to try to do this on their own. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that. So mindfulness, it's very simply put, is just choosing to focus our minds on this moment on purpose and without judgment. Right. So when you think about when you're super stressed and you're worried about the future, if I do this thing, my world's going to cave in. If I do that thing, or if this thing happens to me that I know could happen, then all of these things, it's the domino effect. And so that's the opposite of mindfulness, because we're worrying about things in the future that may never even happen.
Yeah.
And so we purposely bring ourselves back to the moment with some simple exercises. I can do one or two with you if you'd like, that help us just focus on right now. And that's really all we, as a truck
I know. I just
runs
heard
by
it.
my house. Sorry about that. But yeah, so focusing on just what is right now, what's here and now. And it's important for so many reasons to be able to do that. And a few of them I've mentioned, but others are, when we're in really stressful situations, let's say maybe we're at work and we're having a really tense interaction with our employer, for example, being able to be mindful and just stay in this moment and interact with them in a mindful way, rather than, oh my gosh, he said this and it means all of these things, and getting having a lack of ability to just stay right there in the moment and respond appropriately. It's makes all the difference in the world when you can do that.
Yeah.
So lots and lots of reasons that mindfulness, although it's kind of this, woo woo kind of a thing, right? New agey thing, it's actually, it has some concrete benefits in
Yeah.
everyday life.
I've thought about like times I've been in a crisis, like a crisis moment, and everything seems to be hitting all at once.
Yeah.
It's like that movie, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, right? Um, and it's easy to become overwhelmed. And people have asked me, like, Jerry, how do you handle a crisis like that? Like, you always seem cool and collected. I'm like, well, that's just my panic face looks the same as my calm, collected face. You just don't know the difference. Um,
Lucky.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and so what I share with them is, with my team is like what I'll wind up doing is I take a deep breath
Yeah.
and I look around the room and it's like, okay, I've got all these things coming on, but what can I really work on right now? Like what is, and so I
Mhm.
lay out the facts,
Mhm.
uh, and I keep the story out of it in the moment, in the heat of the moment. And then it's like, okay, from here, what is the most important thing to tackle here? The one thing, because I can only do one thing. There's too much going on.
Right.
And then once I decided that one thing, then it's like, great. then I go take action on the one thing. And what winds up happening is other people see me doing the one thing and they either A, jump in and help me, or B, they look around and they realize, oh, Jerry's overlooked this thing over here. I'll go take
Yeah.
care of that to help him with the thing he's doing over there. And then somebody else will say, well, they're doing this and they're doing this. I could do this one thing. Like without telling anybody anything, folks start to spring into action. And it's all
Mm.
because you take that pause, deep breath. What
Yeah.
is, what's the one thing I can do? Go do that one thing. And you got to be okay with letting everything else go. Like,
Beautiful.
just going to focus on the one thing. And then, once things start to stabilize, you look up and say, oh, we forgot to lock the door over there. Or, hey, did anybody call 911? And so,
The
and by then somebody has.
clarity.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Uh,
clarity that comes with focusing on one thing is amazing.
yeah.
It's
Oh, yeah.
difficult. And I'm sure that has served you in your life, Jerry, that ability that it seems kind of natural probably for you. It's not natural for everyone.
No.
So practicing that is super, super important,
Yeah. I
especially
heard
with
ADHD helps a little bit.
yeah.
uh,
Yeah, you've got more attention on that area for
yeah.
sure. Cause
Oh, yeah.
yeah. Mhm.
So mindfulness, it's all about being in the moment right now, just looking at what is, judging nothing. It's not like, oh, I can't
Right.
believe. It's like, yes, the person said this.
This is
Um,
what it
that
is.
you're removing the judgment from it. Well, they said it because I'm not worthy. They said it because I'm not pretty. I'm not smart. I'm not, capable. And you're just saying it. It's what they stated.
Those are the words that came out of their mouth. Okay, got it.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then I think it seems to also help if you state what is about you. I am a
Yeah.
dignified person. Um,
Mhm.
if you are Christian, I'm a dignified creation.
Yeah.
And so it's like,
Yeah.
I am this. I am educated. I am capable.
Mhm.
A friend of mine said, it'd be great what we could accomplish if we remove all the knots out of our lives. I'm not smart. I'm not capable. I'm not handsome, whatever.
Yeah.
Then
Yeah.
you're left with the phrase of I am, and very powerful.
What it is, and what happens a lot of times when we talk about people, I look at things that cause trauma in our life, and when a couple of them are, you know, different types of abuse. Either I'm in a cult or over, that kind of a situation, or I'm in a narcissistic
Yeah,
relationship. And all of those I am statements get ripped away.
they
And
do.
at least
Yeah,
the positive ones, right? And you're told all of these negative things and those things are highlighted
yeah,
in your life. And so because that's a really huge form of control that
yeah.
those
You should
people
be
have.
grateful you
So
have a job here.
holy moly, I tell you. So just reestablishing that, like, wait a minute, I'm not an awful person. I'm not useless. I'm not slow. All of the things that, trauma survivors have been told, it takes some time to rebuild that.
Yeah,
And I'll just throw that in: writing things out again, acknowledging those things about yourself on paper, taking that thought, putting it on paper is really important.
yeah. Now, we mentioned, when I say we, I mean you mentioned, because you're the expert who wrote the book, Dialectical Behavioral Therapy, DBT.
Mhm.
We just talked about mindfulness. We probably don't have time to go through all the remaining three:
Mhm.
distress tolerance, emotional regulation, and interpersonal effectiveness. But of those three, like, which one would you say stands out? I mean, they all, I'm sure, are equal value, equal weight. But what would be the next thing that somebody would want to consider if they're trying to work through some things on their own?
Do you know what that is going to be? I love that you asked this question. It's going to be a little bit different for everyone depending on where they are in their recovery process. People who come to me oftentimes come to me when their life is upside down.
Hmm.
Like I am completely losing control. And in that case, of course, mindfulness, I say, let's start, everybody should start there, and let's get some of those practices down. But distress tolerance is super helpful if your life is upside down and you've got things coming at you. But one thing that I do include in this book is a little quiz at the beginning of the book, and then at the end of each kind of module, and it's kind of a roadmap for you, or a mood assessment. If you've got the book in front of you, there's one on page, I
Yeah.
think, 22. So it helps you determine, where do I go next? So you answer a few questions and score yourself. And based on your score, you turn to that next module in the book that may, that addresses what kind of you're dealing with. So,
I love that. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I saw
yeah.
that when I was previewing the book earlier. That's
Mhm.
really cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Because sometimes you don't know. You're like, all I know is that I feel like I'm in the middle of a hurricane, right? Everything is a mess. And one thing that happens, you may have seen this happen with people too, is when one thing goes wrong, a bunch of things wind up going wrong. Like
yeah.
it's almost always a cascade effect, and every part of your life gets touched, and not in a good way. So it is really important to kind of have that guide to say, wait a minute, what do I even do first? What do I
Yeah.
do? So
Oh,
that's why I
that's
did that.
yeah. I mean, it's such a big deal to really look at the whole life, the big picture, because, and here at Beyond the Rut, we talk about faith, family, fitness, finances, and your outlook on future possibility, because
Mhm.
all those interconnect. And so, like, if you are worried about your finances, you might see that your emotional health is also taking a hit. Your family relationships are taking a hit. If you're worried about your outlook on future growth and possibility, like, am I ever going to get promoted in this job?
Yeah.
You'll start to see the stress hit in other places as well. And,
Mhm.
if you're just physically, you know, ailing in some way, that could put an impact on other things. And so, yeah, they all come together. I'd love that that's discussed here in this book, and
Mhm.
covered, and people get to work through it. Now, as a certified trauma recovery coach, like, what would be a good, how am I going to ask this question? It's so, like, choosing between a certified recovery trauma recovery coach versus like a psychologist or psychiatrist or counselor. Like,
Yeah.
why would somebody choose? You know, a recovery coach would be the better option right now.
Yeah. So I think that that's a really personal question, but
Yeah.
it's a good question because a lot of people don't really know the difference. So, or they're unsure of the difference. So I chose, you know, coaching over therapy for a couple of reasons, specifically for trauma. And the main reason was the ability of a coach to connect on a real personal level, versus a therapist is required to maintain a little bit of professional distance,
Yeah.
right? And for lots of really great reasons. And it's really important for therapists to do that, especially when working with people with real mental health illnesses,
Mhm.
right? Trauma is an injury that happens. The injury happens both in your brain, in your body, and a coach is able to come in, connect with you on a real way. I come in really as a peer. We learn from each other, we work together. I share my experiences, you share yours, and we're really able to work through this together. It's a completely different feel, and it's uniquely beneficial in a trauma situation.
Yeah.
The other reason that is just more on the business side is, because I tend to move around a bit on my own. Licensure in America is, in one state or group of states, and they can only work with people in that area. And I didn't want to be kind of shoehorned into one place
Yeah.
and limited as to who I can help. So,
Yeah, that makes sense too, because now you're not just limited to people in Colorado either. If you have someone
right.
in New York City who needs to talk to you, they can
Mhm.
reach out and get your help.
Yeah.
And I think, if I understand, like, the biggest difference between coaching and counseling also is coaching tends to be more future focused as well. Like, where are you going from here? What's life going to look like now that you've gone through this? Whereas
Yeah.
counselors also have that obligation to heal what happened to you in the past. Like, hey, let's
Yeah.
walk you through and help you face what you've gone through. And so that's
Yeah.
also a big difference. Now, are there times where you're working with someone and you realize, oh, they do need a counselor, and you make that recommendation as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. And a lot of times I will work hand in hand with with a therapist, a licensed therapist. So if a person has a mental illness or an issue that requires therapy, typically what will happen is if they have a therapist already, then I, make sure that that therapist is comfortable working alongside a coach. If they are, then wonderful. And we move forward. I help with the bits that I can help with. And, the things that the therapist deals with, they handle as well. And we can work hand in hand that way. I have had times when I've had a therapist say, you know what? I'd rather not work alongside a coach right now. It's not in the best interest of this client for this
Yeah.
reason. And in that case, I will step back and say, listen, when you're ready, come back to me, but get this worked out first, work with this therapist first. So I have a deep respect for therapists and what they do and their education level and all of that. And I just think with trauma therapy or with trauma recovery specifically, I just love that coaching modality, the ability to get closer. So
Yeah. Nice.
mhm.
And it's a good, important thing that we distinguish between the two, and that you can have both. And then also to let, reassure folks, especially the counselors out there, are going to be like, hey, wait a sec. Oh, yeah, she's helping us. So
Yeah,
it's-
definitely, definitely. Well, and I turned to a therapist when I was initially hit
yeah.
with trauma. And, I didn't really know the difference then either. I didn't realize I was traumatized. I go over that in the book a little bit, but so my therapist really, and I mentioned her in this book. I still talk to her.
Yeah.
I have really deep respect for her. And she encouraged me to write this book actually too.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes I'm a little nervous about having a friend who is a therapist, because it's like, am I going to get a bill after this conversation? I thought we were just having coffee.
Exactly. I don't need therapy today. I just need you to listen.
We're just going to have lunch.
Yes. Yes. That's funny.
Uh, now, chances are when we air this episode, the book is already out there, Trauma Recovery by
Mhm.
Jolyn Armstrong. And so where can people find this book and get a copy for themselves and start working through its pages?
Yeah, it's available on Amazon, a few other places. What I would say is every place it's available is listed on my website, and I did create a landing page just for your listeners.
Yay!
Yeah, it has all of the information, ways to get in touch with me, some goodies for your listeners as well that's special for them. And that's gvtraumarecovery.com /beyond the rut.
That's
So
us.
yeah,
Beyond
that's
the
you.
Red. Now, before we go, though, Jolyn, what is a final word of wisdom you'd like to share with those who are recovering from trauma?
Yeah, I think, well, a couple of things I'd love to say. One is if your life is feeling chaotic, out of control, don't dismiss the fact that you may be traumatized. Until you acknowledge that, hey, this may be what I'm dealing with, you can't heal from it. So just be open to that. If things don't feel right, they probably aren't. And the other thing I want to say is that being traumatized does not make you less of a person. And it's okay. If we're physically traumatized in a car accident or whatever, we don't think less of ourselves. This is the same kind of a thing, right? It's emotional trauma it's the real deal, and it can happen to anyone, and it's okay, and you can heal from it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Jolyn, still great to have you on the show.
Yeah, I'm so glad to have come back, Jerry. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh man, I'm so glad you were on. We're gonna stay in touch, of course, and we may be able to get you on here again and again and again.
Beautiful.
Especially if people are reaching out to us and saying, "I love that episode. Give us more." Oh,
Yeah.
heck yes, we're gonna do this. Thank you so
Awesome.
much.
Thanks, Jerry.